Hello, everybody. It's your old spooky friend, M-Booty. This just makes me sound like I'm saying M-Booty. Let's talk about Rush Duel. So in case you're unfamiliar, the TCG isn't the only way to enjoy the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. There's also Speed Duel, the One True Format Battle Pack 3 draft, and, recently, Rush Duel. Rush Duel is that type of Yu-Gi-Oh! That you've probably seen floating around online where the card frames look actually good and Diane Keto is a mommy. For some reason, no physical product for this type of dueling has ever been available in the United States. I have no idea why. Perhaps they thought our brains were too full of high fructose corn syrup to understand that some effects have a cost associated with them. But the end result is if you live in a TCG territory, your options for experiencing Rush Duel are pretty few and far between. I think the only way you can play it on official software is Rush Duel Dawn of the Battle Royale, which is a Nintendo Switch online shop only game that came out a couple of years ago. They still give it out as prizing if you do well in a paper event, but it hasn't been updated since release. Until now! This past weekend, Duel Links finally reached the Yu-Gi-Oh! 7's world, and with it, they introduced an entirely separate ladder for the game, Rush Duel. This kicks ass. I like Rush Duel because it feels like a Yu-Gi-Oh! That was designed from the ground up around what makes Yu-Gi-Oh! Fun. Every time people try to redesign Yu-Gi-Oh! They retread the same old ground. What if the game was like it was in 2006, this slow plodding back and forth that's insanely derivative of Magic the Gathering? But Rush Duel is the first product that I think understands why people play Yu-Gi-Oh! We want to draw a million cards in one turn, summon a million monsters in one turn, and ideally play a game that lasts more than one turn. Rush Duel is exactly that. Each turn, a player draws up to 5 cards in hand, can normal summon any number of times they want over the course of the turn, and monsters are incredibly strategic, but very simple. And now that there's a meter stick by which you can measure how good you are at this style of gameplay, I'm going to let you know how to beat everyone else. Now, before we get into the decks that are powerful in Rush Duel's debut, I want to impart a couple of lessons upon you about how Rush Duels work and how card evaluation is radically different than what you're familiar with in the TCG. Firstly, because you have the opportunity to draw up to 5 cards at the start of your turn, cards that draw you other cards are frequently very bad, and cards that discard cards are frequently very good. You want to pretty much be going through your entire hand every turn, and you can expect some number of the cards in your hand are going to be dead or unsummonable or something. As a result, filtering through those cards via either a discard outlet to draw an additional card on the next turn, or a card like Mystic Dealer, which allows you to immediately cash in for potentially a better option, are really, really good. Inversely, trap cards like Giant Tortoise of Greed, which read when your opponent normal summons a monster, draw 2 cards, seem like they'd be broken in a lower power format, but in reality what you're doing is preventing yourself from drawing 2 cards at the start of your turn. It's like an advance on those 2 cards that costs you a card and gets you no benefit because you can't do anything with the 2 cards you just drew. Secondly, the fact that monsters are simple means that you have to have a plan for your opponent setting 3 cards every turn. So in practice, people are going to make aggressive pushes at some point. There's not really a payoff or a reason to just stall the entire time, but if your opponent is bricking, you need to be able to push your advantage, and you can't do that if you have 3 high attack monsters, each of which can attack a single time, and your opponent just sets 3 monsters in defense position every turn. Then on their next turn, draws into 3 new monsters and sets those as well. Mostly these stalemates are broken by a couple of individually powerful cards around which the entire metagame is warped. Firstly is the most powerful card in Rush Duel at present, Multi-Strike Dragon Dragios. This card can attack twice. Second is Torna the Windweaver. This card can switch a face-down monster to face-up attack position. And thirdly is just a general category of cards that can do damage to your opponent even if all of their monsters are in defense position. This includes monsters like Kime Ruler the Dark Ruler, which work really well in conjunction with other cards like Yame Ruler the Dark Delayer, and spell cards like Pierce that allow you to take advantage of powerful 1500 attack monsters with 0 defense that opponents will likely be setting in defense position so they don't die. It's hard to impart to players that have never played Rush Duel why a card like Pierce, a normal spell that gives 1 monster piercing for 1 turn, are like UR levels of playable. So early in the TCG, it behooved you not only to play really powerful tribute monsters like the Monarchs, it also behooved you to play high attack level 4 or lower monsters so you could be getting in before you finally set up a big tribute push. That's not necessarily true in Rush Duels. Because a significant amount of your monsters are pretty much always just going to be fodder for level 7 or higher monsters, you can afford to play some pretty bad guys at the 4 and lower slot. Frequently evaluating a card has a lot less to do with comparing the numbers in the attack and defense stat and a lot more to do with comparing what those cards can do for you in other scenarios. For instance, if you need an Earth target for your Sevens Road Magician deck, you might pass over a card like Gazelle, the King of Mythical Beasts, despite the fact that it has a really powerful attack stat for a 4-star monster, in favor of a card like Strange Cat. That's because realistically, you are likely not going to be doing anything with the monster that you summon outside of just sacrificing it for a higher level monster. Strange Cat could theoretically come up if you need to pitch it with a Mystic Dealer, and its defensive stat is high enough that anything but a 1500 attacker is just going to bounce off it in a scenario where you're trying to protect your life total. It's nuanced, but it means that some of these cards are going to have some explanations that are probably not satisfactory to people with TCG brain. Historically, when Rush Duel was first released, there's pretty much only one deck worth playing, and it's a result of the spells and traps that were viable during that period. Dragoncaster is a deck that was enabled by the starter decks. It includes a card that is functionally just Mirror Force if you have enough spellcasters in grave. This was the meta for like months, but thankfully Duel Links has taken precautions to ensure that one deck isn't so wholly dominant that it's going to be making up the entirety of top cuts. There's like 4 or 5 playable things that we'll go over today. With that, let's get into what to play. Let's go. First up is Dragoncaster. This deck has a lot in common with the deck labeled Aggro on Duel Links Meta's website. I think that's just a result of the fact that they didn't really know how to classify extremely loose piles that were getting into King of Games day one. In my estimation, this is the best deck in the format, bar none. And if you look at tournament results, it is functionally the only game in town at present. But it's not so much better than every other deck that it's invincible. It does have pretty clear weaknesses, and like any other deck, it can draw poorly and as a result, fall to a more aggressive strategy that has drawn better. The concept of this deck is that it's functionally playing the best individual card in every single slot, while still making concessions for Sevens Road Magician in order to get every attribute of monster into play. The end result is a deck that's not only incredibly consistent, it's powerful without having to use its skill, meaning it can use the Legend Draw skill, which allows you to draw a Legend card from your deck as part of the 5 that you draw when you're down to 0. The Legend in the deck is Summon to Skull, which is a single tribute monster that contests, well, any 7-star monster in the game at present. Let me walk you through the individual cards. So first up, we've got Multi-Strike Dragon Dragios. This, as I mentioned earlier, is your breaker, but it's also a pretty safe summon onto an empty board just because it's very difficult to just get a 2500 attack point monster off the field without committing a bunch of resources to something like a Thunder Push. We have, of course, Sevens Road Magician, which is powerful for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that it gets larger than Multi-Strike Dragon Dragios. So he's great for the crackback, but not so good to commit to turn 1 because, of course, he could be run over very effectively by that card. We're playing 2 copies of Rice Terrace Secure. If you're seeing that UR and thinking, oh my god, this card is a fine utility monster, but nowhere near necessary. I've shaved it down between 1, 2, and 3. I've played Currybot in this slot. I do like this one, I think, better than any other option. It enables you to occasionally out cards like Dragios, provided you brick on too many high-level monsters, but admittedly, that doesn't happen often. We're playing 2 copies of Sevens Road Witch. This is just the number of tributes I like to play, 9 here, 6 7s, and 3 6s. But this also has a lot of synergy with the deck because if you draw both her and a copy of Sevens Road Magician, she can just cycle cards in your hand to get the Sevens Road Magician out for less investment. We've got Thunder the Thunder. This card's unbelievable. It's light, which most of the cards in this deck aren't, which means that it's fantastic for Sevens Road Magician, but importantly, it can sink the attack of an opponent's monster by just a little, which means that your Dragios can trade for their Dragios, and not crashing a Dragios is crazy, because then you get to attack again. Fire Golem is the fire in the deck. He's a spellcaster, which works with our next card, Mystic Dealer. There are also some scenarios where, like, his effect will come up. You'll switch a monster to defense with something like Rice Terra Secure, and then you can get over it with a little guy instead of committing like a Sevens Road Magician attack into a big monster by using Fire Golem to sink its defense. 3 Mystic Dealer. This card is unbelievable. Almost a build-around at this stage in Rush Duel's history. Any seasoned Rush veteran can tell you this is really, really strong. It allows you to send a spellcaster-type monster from your hand to the graveyard to draw a card. Of course, not only are a significant amount of the cards in our deck spellcasters, which means we can dig for powerful tribute monsters, if we brick on too many tribute monsters, there's a pretty high % chance a lot of those are going to be spellcasters. So we can cycle something like a second copy of the Sevens Road Magician for potentially more fodder with which to tribute it. We've, of course, got the Summon Skull in our Legends slot, 3 copies of Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress #1. If you don't have this card, don't fret. It's absolutely not necessary. There's is a Spellcaster Wind Monster Archer something that can fill this slot immediately. I believe these are rewards for getting some characters that are kind of difficult to get early on. And then, of course, we've got some 1500 beaters, 3 Dark Sorcerer, and our Earth target 3 Gazelle, the king of mythic old beasts. We are playing 1 copy of Phantom Bind. In my opinion, this is really the only spell trap worth playing right now, unless you're dedicated to like a Yami Ruler strategy. Some people are playing the like Spellcaster Cycle card, which is like a way to invest a card in an opening hand to a future hand, so you can potentially get a 6-card hand, which is important for the Spellcaster that changes the battle position of opponent's monsters by discarding cards in hand. I think that's mostly cope. I like combat tricks. This is the only combat trick really worth playing, and it doesn't come up very often, but when it does, it's a complete blowout, and setting a card means that your opponent's going to play around it the whole game regardless, so that's potentially valuable. Next up is Dragonic Resonance. Like the last deck, this deck aims to make use of Multi-Strike Dragon Dragios, but it supplements that strategy with exclusively dragon monsters. That's because Dragonic Resonance is a skill that allows you, if you have an Earth Dragon with a certain amount of attack on your side of the field, to boost 2 dragons' attack on your side of the field until the end of the turn. This can help you win big pushes against enemy Dragioses, but it can also help you OTK by syncing your opponent's monsters with Gravity Press Dragon and attacking directly with Twin Edge. This deck also almost never has a problem sacrificing monsters because of Sports Dragon Slugger and Sports Dragon Pitcher, and it also gets to play one of the only playable spells at this stage in Rush Duel's lifespan, Dragonic Pressure, which allows you to send 3 dragon monsters from your hand to the graveyard to destroy all monsters on the field, and special summon a level 4 or lower dragon-type monster from your graveyard to your field in face-up defense position. You can use this to get a pitcher for Slugger, and then if the last card in your hand is Dragios, you are smooth sailing. Let's go through the cards on this one. We are playing 2 copies of Dragonic Slayer. If you have another level 7 or higher dragon monster on your field, you can destroy a spell trap on your opponent's field. This is really, really strong, but at present there aren't really very many powerful spell traps individuals are setting, so you're unlikely to get a lot of value out of this. The reason we're playing this card is because it's an Earth Dragon that satisfies the requirement on Dragonic Resonance. 2 Dragios and 1 copy of the Limit 3 Phoenix Dragon. This card allows you to send a card from your hand to the graveyard to add a level 5 or higher dragon monster from your graveyard to your hand. While this is unfortunately competing for the 3 slot with Dragios, it's so incredibly powerful and has so much utility in this deck that I think it's probably worth an inclusion. We've got 3 copies of Gravity Press Dragon, which allows you to send a card from your hand to the graveyard to sink an opponent's monster by 700. This is great for running your Dragios into your opponent's Dragios, but also stuff like your Fire Dragon into your opponent's Dragios. It allows you to trade super profitably with pretty much anything in the format. We've got 2 Triad Drago. If your opponent has a 7 and you have 2 face-up non-level 3 dragon monsters on your field, you can draw a card. This card's good, but most of the dragons you want to be summoning are 3s. Sports Dragon Slugger, Twin Edge Dragon, for instance, do kind of compete for that slot, and as a result, I'm only playing 2 copies. We've got Slugger and Pitcher. Both of these cards have the same effect. If you have no other monsters on your side of the field, you can special the other from your graveyard, and your level 6 and lower monsters can't attack that turn, which includes Gravity Press Dragon and Fire Guardian. We've got 3 copies of Twin Edge Dragon. To send a card from your hand to the graveyard allows this card to attack twice during this turn. That means if you boost it, you can almost OTK with him alone. We've got 2 copies of Fire Guardian. We just wanted to be playing a couple more tribute monsters, and this is a really strong singleton tribute. We've got 3 copies of Winged Dragon Guardian of the Fortress #1, 3 Drago Rite, and 3 Draconic Pressure. Finally, we're going to take a look at what I would consider to be a stun deck in the context of Rush Duel, and that is Yami Ruler the Dark Delayer, a Gavin deck playing Dark Arts of Celerity. This skill allows you, during the turn that you normal summoned a 6 or higher warrior monster, switch an opponent's monster to defense position. Now, you saw how many hoops we were willing to jump through in previous decks to get powerful cards like Multi-Strike Dragon Dragios into defense position, so a skill that just does it unrespondable is unbelievably powerful. But that's not the only broken part about this deck. Yami Ruler the Dark Delayer is one of the most frustrating cards to sit across the table from, especially in early Rush. During the turn you normal summon this card, you can change its battle position, and then until the end of the opponent's next turn while it's face up, neither player can tribute summon level 7 or higher monsters. This puts your opponent in a big pickle. If they draw a hand that includes a level 7 or higher monster, they can't summon it. So as a result, they have to set their hand so they don't die to the 2,500 attack point monster that you have on your side of the field, and additional monsters you'll be able to summon on your own next turn. Because all of their monsters are now on the field, you can destroy them, potentially bricking your opponent on too many level 7 or higher monsters on their next turn, which loses them the game on the spot. But that's not all. The downside to activating the effect of Yami Ruler the Dark Delayer is you normal summon him in attack position, then activate his effect to switch him to defense position. But his effect doesn't switch him to defense position, it switches his battle position. So if you can summon him and then activate Bonded Bowing, you can switch him to defense position using the effect of this card, then use his effect to switch him back to attack. This means not only is your opponent going to be stunned, they are taking damage this turn. You can accomplish this in reverse with Nondes the Fire Awakener, switching him to defense, then activating Nondes' effect to switch him back to attack. But that's not all! Kimei Ruler the Dark Raider is an 8-star monster, which, if your opponent has no attack position monsters on their field during the turn you normal summon this card, allows you to, if you send the top card of your deck to the graveyard, attack directly. Of course, you can only attack with warriors, but who cares? This deck has the capacity to put your opponent in a no-win situation. If you can get out Yami Ruler and successfully resolve its effect, their back is against the wall. Either you're going to be able to swing this from defense back into attack and get over their meager defenses, locking them for an additional turn after they fail to summon anything. If they put up a defensive wall in order to prevent you from attacking with the Yami Ruler, you can get over with the Kimei Ruler, or even a card like Pierce. And if they set monsters at all, they potentially find themselves in a situation where they have too many level 7 or higher monsters in their hand and can't perform a normal summon on their next turn. That's not even to mention the fact that this card has 2,500 attack points, meaning that Dragios isn't going to be able to clear it on its own. You'll either have to set up a bit of a Gravity Press combo if you're playing dragons, or just pray for Seven's Road. Now, I don't want to oversell this deck. Despite the fact that its combo is very powerful, it is a combo, and for that reason it frequently does get run over by more aggressive decks like Dragoncaster. It's also very hard to play, which means that a misstep can put you in a position where an opponent can really take advantage of a meager setup. Let's go through the individual cards. We've got Yami Ruler, 3 copies of Curry Bot, which if you have no other monsters on your field allows you to pay 5 to add a Curry Bot from your graveyard to your hand. It's just a really good tribute fodder. Kimei Ruler, 1 copy of Ugemi, the Ruler's Squad. If a face-up defense position monster is on the field, you can send the top card of your deck to the graveyard to make a face-up monster on your opponent's field lose 500 attack and defense until the end of this turn. Thunder the Thunder, Nondes the Fire Awakener, Fire Golem, triple Twin-Edged Dragon to push for damage, triple Masaki the Legendary Samurai, double Bonded Bowing, double Pierce, and a Phantom Bind. Notably, this second Pierce should probably be a third Bonded Bowing, but this is a drop from Gavin, and I don't want to farm it. Those are the decks I wanted to talk about today. By no means do I think that's an exhaustive list. Far from it. There's a lot of really powerful stuff you can be playing in Rush Duel. For instance, there's a Spellcaster deck that is very similar to the Dragon deck in that it allows you to pump your own monsters over the threshold of something like a Dragios while wielding Spellcaster monsters on the limited 3 list that allow you to change your opponent's monsters to face up attack position and get in for huge damage. Lightning Volcandor is a structure deck that has evolved into a really powerful combo strategy that sometimes just fails to convert, and Beatdown is probably the funniest deck in the format. It utilizes Diabolic King Beetle alongside a deck full of 1-star monsters in order to pump monsters to like obscene, ludicrous levels. But I don't think any of those decks are as competitive as the ones that I talked about today. Hopefully this video inspires you to start your own Rush Duel journey. At present, it's pretty easy to get King of Games in Duel Links. You only have to get past Gold 5 on the Rush Duel ladder, so I implore you to use the lists in this video to hit the ground running and crush the competition. Oh, and the Frankfurter Fettuccine woman who plays the Dommy Mommy Diane Keto cards comes out tomorrow, so get in.